today's video, we're going to take a closer look at some of the mysterious cases that still have no explanation to this day. The mysterious disappearance of Stephen Damon. On a quiet morning at the end of October 1955, the Damon family was just beginning to adjust to their new life in a peaceful neighborhood on Long Island. The father, Jerry Damon, served in the Air Force and was often away from home, while the mother, Marilyn, stayed at home to take care of their two young children. Stephen, the older son, was almost 3 years old, and everyone called him Stevie. His younger sister, Pamela, was only 7 months old. Like so many other mothers at that time, Marilyn tried her best to balance housework while looking after her children. That morning, she took both kids to a bakery near their home to buy bread. She left Pamela in the stroller right in front of the shop, which was very common for mothers back then, while Stevie stood outside, eating gummy candy and waiting for his mom. For Marilyn, this was just another ordinary morning, and she never imagined anything could happen to her children. But in just 10 short minutes, everything changed. When Marilyn stepped out of the bakery, she no longer saw the stroller or her two children anywhere. Panic hit her immediately. Marilyn hurried down the street, calling out her son's name and searching for any sign. Not long after, someone found Pamela safe in her stroller a few blocks away, but Stevie had completely vanished. That same day, the police and local residents organized a large-scale search. Hundreds of people, from volunteers to Jerry's fellow servicemen, all joined in the search. They went door to door, hoping someone had seen or heard something useful. Among countless statements, only one person said they saw a stranger carrying a small boy outside the bakery, but the information was too vague and led to no concrete clues. What made people even more confused was that the kidnapper had left Pamela, but only took Stevie, even though a baby like Pamela, who couldn't walk yet, would have been much easier to abduct. The days that followed passed slowly, and hope gradually faded. The Damon family sank into despair. Marilyn was so shocked and heartbroken that she had to be hospitalized. Jerry tried to stay strong, but the loss of their child weighed heavily on both of them. Soon after the disappearance, the Damon family received several ransom letters, demanding a large sum of money for Stevie's return. But the truth came out quickly. These were just scams sent by a college student trying to take advantage of their desperation. This pain changed the family's life forever. 2 years after the incident, Jerry and Marilyn divorced. Each tried to build a new life, but neither could forget their missing child. In 1957, hope was reignited when the body of a boy was found in Philadelphia, whose age and some physical features were quite similar to Stevie. The police conducted a very thorough investigation, but DNA tests confirmed that the body was not Stevie. Many years later, in 2009, a man in Michigan claimed that he was Stephen Damon, but DNA tests once again did not match. As time went on, the Damon's neighbors began to share stories that gave people chills. An elderly woman living next door said she often heard Stevie crying inside the house. There was a time when she saw Marilyn hit Stevie very hard right at the playground, so much that the witnesses were moved to tears. Some mentioned that Stevie once had a broken arm when he was little. The old woman's husband once tried to report the matter to the military chaplain, but was only warned not to interfere in other people's family affairs. Just a week after Stevie disappeared, she also noticed a strange smell around the Damon house, and a nurse friend told her it could be the smell of a dead body. Some people said they had not seen Stevie appear for several days before the disappearance happened. These details have led to many chilling theories. Some believe Stevie was kidnapped by a stranger to be raised as their own, or for some dark purpose. But there are also those who believe that the real tragedy happened within his own family, and the story of a kidnapping was just a cover to hide the truth. To this day, there is no clear evidence confirming that Stevie was actually seen outside the bakery that morning, and the silence of the entire community at the time has made all the theories about family violence even more haunting. In America, in the 1950s, almost everyone thought they shouldn't interfere in other people's family matters, no matter how strange things seemed. Looking back at the history of missing children cases, investigators all say that most of the perpetrators are family members or caregivers. Stories of old injuries, violent behavior witnessed by neighbors, and the silence of the community have made the disappearance of Stevie Damon forever one of the coldest mysteries in America. If he were still alive today, Stephen Damon would be a man in his 70s, with a small scar under his chin, blue eyes, and perhaps only a few vague memories of a turbulent childhood. Or maybe he never even knew he was once at the center of one of the most famous missing persons cases in modern American history. The final journey of James Zapolsky. In July of 1966, the city of Princeton, New Jersey, was as peaceful as it had always been during those long summer days. But for the Zapolsky family, that summer became an unhealed wound, opening a mystery that has lasted nearly 60 years and remains unsolved to this day. James Zapolsky, affectionately known as Jamie, was a 15-year-old teenager. Jamie stood out among his friends thanks to his tall frame, soft brown hair, and green eyes that always seemed full of dreams and determination. For Jamie, nothing brought greater pride than his yellow and white French 15-speed bicycle, which he had bought after months of hard work at part-time jobs. Jamie even put a Tour de France decal on it as a reminder of his dream, to one day bike all the way from New Jersey to Florida. Jamie didn't just talk about his dream, he set out to train for it in earnest. Every day, rain or shine, he biked 20 miles along the familiar roads around Princeton. Neighbors were sometimes surprised at his persistence, but Jamie remained steadfast in his plans. On the morning of the 23rd of July, Jamie left home as usual. He wore a white athletic shirt, cut-off jeans, and sneakers, carrying nothing special with him. No one knew this would be the last time his family would ever see him. That night, Jamie didn't come home as usual. His parents began to worry. At first, they wondered if Jamie might have decided to set out on his big trip to Florida without warning, since they knew their son was independent by nature. They notified the police but kept hoping that Jamie was just off somewhere chasing the adventure he had always talked about. But that hope soon crumbled when another boy came forward, reporting that he had found a yellow and white bicycle at the bottom of the Delaware and Raritan Canal, almost 8 kilometers from Jamie's house. At the time, the boy didn't realize it was Jamie's bike because the Tour de France decal had vanished without a trace. He did report the bike to the police as soon as he found it, but the discovery wasn't connected to Jamie's disappearance until September, when he read about Jamie in the newspaper. Only then did police confirm that it was indeed Jamie's bicycle. This discovery completely changed the direction of the investigation. It proved that Jamie had never actually left Princeton for some far-off journey as people had thought. Instead, something had very likely happened to him close to home. Police quickly sent divers to search for Jamie's body in the canal, but they found nothing. No trace of Jamie was ever found, aside from that bicycle. Nearly 60 years have gone by, and except for that bike, no one has ever found a single clue about what happened to Jamie. When authorities went back through the case, the last confirmed person to see Jamie was Wesley Weissenberger, then 23, who was staying with relatives just a mile from Jamie's home. According to accounts, Jamie had stopped by to ask about a friend, then rode off again, no one knows where. There is no further information about Wesley or his connection to Jamie, and there is no evidence that police ever investigated him further. Jamie's disappearance soon hit a dead end, partly because, at the time, many assumed it was just another case of a teenager running away from home, partly because crucial clues were missed due to delays in connecting key details. The bicycle was reported to police just a day after Jamie went missing, but it took another 2 months before anyone realized it belonged to him, leaving a gaping hole in the timeline and allowing whatever evidence there might have been to disappear with time. Today, the canal where the bike was found has become a bustling state park where people kayak, jog, or cycle along the trails. But Jamie's shadow lives on, only in the cold files left behind. Many theories have been proposed over the years. Some believe Jamie had an accident while biking along the canal. Maybe he slipped and fell into the water and was swept away, but later searches never found a body, nor was there any evidence that an accident had occurred. Others think Jamie was the victim of a crime, but everyone knew Jamie as a healthy, athletic teen who could bike dozens of miles a day without tiring. He hardly seemed an easy target for any kidnapper. Another theory suggests a car might have struck Jamie, and the driver then disposed of his body and tossed the bicycle into the canal. But when the bike was found, it showed no serious damage, making this explanation hard to accept. Some people who knew Jamie believed he was a unique teenager, struggling with emotional problems, few friends, and a tendency to be withdrawn or moody. These differences left Jamie somewhat isolated, and sometimes his actions puzzled those around him. There were people who wondered if Jamie might have taken his own life, especially since he had shown signs of psychological distress. Maybe he had thrown his beloved bike into the canal himself, and then found a secluded place to end his life, and perhaps he tore off the Tour de France decal as a final gesture. All that remains are unanswered questions, a bicycle at the bottom of the canal, and the faint memories of those who once knew Jamie Zapolsky. If he were alive today, Jamie would be a man in his 70s, but that possibility now seems like a distant dream. Both his parents passed away in the early 2000s, never knowing what truly happened to their son. The Silent Ghosts of Central High, two unsolved mysteries in Muncie, Indiana. In the city of Muncie, Indiana, there is an old school quietly standing on South High Street, a place nearly everyone in town has heard of, but not everyone knows about the mysterious stories that have taken place there. Central High School was once the pride of the city, but hidden behind those red brick walls, now covered in moss, are two disappearances that have never been explained. The first story is about a boy named Pearlie Hogg, a 15-year-old who had already endured much hardship from a young age. His father disappeared without a trace on a cold winter night, and his mother died when he was just 2 years old. Pearlie lived with relatives and was finally taken in by his Aunt Minnie and Uncle Charles Cooper, who raised him in their small home. Despite the difficult circumstances, Pearlie was always remembered by those around him as a gentle, hard-working child, especially devoted to his Aunt Minnie, yet deep down, he carried many worries. Perhaps it was the hardships of life and the lack of family warmth that left Pearlie restless. He often thought about running away, and sometimes even shared with relatives his desire to end it all when he felt overwhelmed, especially after conflicts with teachers or classmates. Just a day before he vanished, Pearlie went to the school to withdraw after an altercation with a teacher, someone whom, according to other students, had made threats toward Pearlie in the past. Still, no matter how tense things became, everyone believed he would never willingly leave Aunt Minnie. The bond between them was simply too strong to put into words. On the 21st of December, 1922, like any other day, Pearlie said goodbye to his aunt and uncle and went to work a shift at the grocery store, hoping to earn a little extra money for the coming holidays. But that night, he did not return home. The next morning, when the house was still silent, Aunt Minnie grew anxious and called the police, then gathered the family to begin a search that lasted for weeks. Without any news of Pearlie, time kept passing and hope slowly faded, as every effort to find him led to a dead end. In the end, the family had to accept that Pearlie was gone from their lives. It wasn't until 9 years later, after Central High had changed in many ways, that a group of workers inspecting the ventilation system in the basement made a shocking discovery: a human skeleton curled up in the vent. Even after the police reviewed all missing persons records from the previous years, no one recognized the remains, until Uncle Charles happened to read the newspaper. He recognized the distinctive army boots and the pocket knife he had given Pearlie for his birthday the year before, and there was one last clue: a missing front tooth that he had mentioned when filing the police report. All that remained at the scene was a skeleton squatting in the corner, the knife open in his hand, some school papers, and an old magazine lying nearby. There were no noticeable injuries, and no one could say for sure how Pearlie had ended up in that vent. Some believed he had taken his own life after days of despair. Others suspected that he had been killed and hidden beneath the school, especially in light of rumors about family violence or conflict with his teacher. But in the end, everything remained just unproven speculation, and the disappearance of Pearlie Hogg became an eternal mystery of Central High School. The second story took place 26 years later, on an April night in 1948. Nelson Dull, a 34-year-old artist, told his wife Marion that he couldn't sleep and was going to step outside for a walk to clear his mind. Just a few months earlier, Nelson had been in a serious car accident that left his leg badly injured. He could barely get around and certainly couldn't climb up to any high places or travel far. So when he left the house at midnight, Marion assumed he was simply going to stroll near home, looking for a bit of peace. But when Nelson didn't return the next morning, his family realized something was seriously wrong. 12 days passed. A strange smell began to fill the upper hallways of Central High, just as the ventilation system was being switched on for the first time after the long winter. The building manager, Mr. Aramis Joris, climbed up to the roof to investigate. What he found sent a chill through him. A man's body lay silently in the cramped attic space, barely more than a meter high. The man was unclothed, his clothes folded beside him, but his wedding ring, wallet, and silver bracelet were all missing. The body was so badly decomposed that it was impossible to determine the cause of death or whether there were any injuries. The only items left were an old newspaper and a small chair tipped over by the entrance, as if someone had used it to climb up. After confirming the victim was indeed Nelson Dull, the confusion only deepened when Mr. Joris reported that he had often seen a shadowy figure near the large vent leading straight up to the roof, fueling even more bizarre rumors about the school. Police concluded that Nelson had stayed in the attic for a long time before he died, but his family strongly disagreed. With his severe leg injury, Nelson could hardly have climbed up to the roof on his own, and there was no evidence he had any serious medical condition or had suffered a sudden crisis. In the end, all that remained was a giant question mark over the fate of this man, and the death of Nelson Dull remains unsolved to this day. Tragedy on St. Joseph Avenue. 3 lives lost. An unsolved massacre in Evansville, Indiana. In the city of Evansville, Indiana, there are memories that people have never forgotten, no matter how many generations have come and gone, and no matter how quietly time continues its march. Some wounds never truly heal, some stories are too painful for anyone to speak of, and there are mysteries that lie smoldering beneath the cold earth, never revealing their truth to the living. Such was the case in the summer of 1882, when the city was rocked by a horrifying crime that the press would later call the St. Joseph Avenue Massacre, a murder that took the lives of 3 innocent people, casting a shadow and a wave of fear over the entire community. Nearly a century and a half has passed, and yet the mystery remains unsolved. On the 13th of August, 1882, before the sun had even risen, Frank Loeffler, a diligent beer delivery man well known to every tavern owner in the city, left the Hartmut's brewery as he did every morning, his horse-drawn wagon loaded with cold beer barrels, and began his rounds at the St. Joseph Exchange Tavern up on Babytown Hill. That was where the couple Alex and Elizabeth Weiber, along with their 2 young children, both lived and ran their business. Alex and Elizabeth were German immigrants who had been married in New York before leaving the big, noisy city for the Midwest, hoping for a better life. In their small home at the corner of St. Joseph Avenue and Maryland Street, they had turned the front into a lively tavern with their private living space in the back. That morning, everything seemed normal until Frank pulled up and realized no one came out to greet him as usual. He stepped inside and was met by a scene of chaos. The bar room was in complete disarray, shelves overturned, bottles scattered everywhere, signs that some violent struggle had just taken place. Frank followed the narrow hallway toward the back of the house and was horrified to discover the body of young Frankie, curled up on the floor just outside the kitchen, dressed only in dark trousers. His head had been so brutally beaten it was unrecognizable, and his neck was nearly severed. Forcing himself to remain composed, Frank went to the bedroom, only to be staggered by the sight of Alex and Elizabeth both dead in bed, their bodies buried beneath rumpled sheets, blood soaking from the pillows all the way to the floor. All the evidence showed they'd been attacked while asleep, with only Elizabeth showing signs of a final struggle. Alex appeared to have had no chance to defend himself before he was killed. In that suffocating room, one thing stood out. The baby Johnny, only 5 months old, was lying quietly in his cradle, just an arm's length from his parents' bed. The infant was still alive, covered in blood, his faint whimpers echoing through the carnage and sending chills through anyone who witnessed it. The investigation quickly determined that the primary murder weapon was Alex's own wooden-handled axe, found at the scene still stained with blood and hair. However, the tool used to cut the victims' throats had vanished completely, leaving no trace. Though the house showed signs of a search, as if the killer had been looking for money or valuables, most belongings remained untouched. Even the only locked drawer still held more than $50 in cash. Clues around the property only deepened the mystery. Outside by the garden, a ladder leaned against the window, but the window itself was locked from the inside. In the dirt in front of the house, police found a single footprint, clearly from someone wearing only socks, leading toward the woods, where a man's slipper had been abandoned. Yet all these pieces remained scattered, and no one could fit them together into a complete picture of the crime. News of the massacre spread quickly throughout Evansville. Hundreds of people flocked to the scene, and the newspapers described it as a sight that would haunt anyone who saw it. Police scoured the city, questioning everyone from vagrants to strangers recently spotted on the river, but all were released for lack of evidence. At one point, 2 men, Charles Carter and Philip Vole, were arrested because of a blood-stained handkerchief, but police determined the blood came from a cut on the hand, and the knife involved had been sold before the murders. Another prominent suspect was George Lanhart, the Weiber family's landlord and himself a German immigrant, who had publicly feuded with Alex and threatened to kill him when drunk. Neighbors even recalled hearing him utter chilling threats. But when called in, George calmly showed his leg injury, agreed to go to the police station without protest, and ultimately all the physical evidence against him was circumstantial. Even the faint bloodstains found on his shoes were not enough to hold him, and George Lenhart was released without ever facing charges. For a short while after the murders, the entire Evansville community was gripped by fear and speculation. The police offered a $500 reward for any information, but soon enough, everything faded into silence. The Weiber family was buried on a stormy day, rain pouring down, thunder and black clouds swirling above the cemetery, as if the heavens themselves wanted to swallow their tragedy into the eternal darkness of the city's history. Over time, the family's small grave faded and crumbled, their names gradually lost amid the bustle of daily life, leaving only an unsolved crime, a lingering ghost story that has haunted Evansville for generations. The Halloween Night Mystery. Who killed Myrtle Morgan in Chattanooga, Tennessee? When darkness fell over the city of Chattanooga on Halloween night in 1953, Mrs. Myrtle Morgan, a 60-year-old woman, was preparing for what she thought would be a peaceful evening in her modest home on Rossville Avenue. No one could have predicted that this peace would be shattered by a tragedy that, to this day, remains haunting and unsolved. Around 7 p.m., Myrtle was chatting on the phone with a friend when she suddenly paused mid-sentence and gently said, "Hold on, I just heard a strange noise." Probably Buster's dirty-faced cat again. No one knew these would be her last words on the phone before everything fell into absolute silence. Buster was the nickname Myrtle used for Price Stevens, her 21-year-old son-in-law who was living upstairs in 2 small rooms with her daughter, Norma. That night, most of the family was away. Norma and her brother Jarvis, just back from military leave, had taken Price's younger sister and a friend out roller skating. Price himself was not home either. He was having dinner at a nearby diner with a close neighbor. Only Myrtle was left alone in the quiet house. After hearing the strange noise, she put down the phone and went to check, vanishing from the conversation and leaving her friend on the other end anxiously calling her name, getting no answer. At around 7:22 that evening, Chattanooga police received an urgent call reporting something unusual at Myrtle Morgan's home. The friend on the phone said that after a creaking door sound, there was only an eerie silence. Police rushed to the scene at the same time. Price Stevens was returning home from dinner. When police explained why they were there, Price and a neighbor tried to open the door but discovered it was bolted from the inside. That meant someone had slid the lock right after entering, and there was no other way in, so Price had to crawl through a front window to get inside. Inside the house, the first thing Price saw was an overturned chair in the living room, a clear sign of a brief struggle. The phone was still ringing, Myrtle's friend still desperately calling out for her, but Price could only say he didn't know what was going on. He and the police searched every room in confusion and growing fear. When they opened the kitchen door, everyone froze in shock at the heartbreaking scene before them. Myrtle was lying on her back on the kitchen floor, her body covered only with a thin comforter. Her dress and underwear were torn, but a later autopsy found no evidence of sexual assault. Her face had been struck hard with a heavy object, her nose broken, her facial bones, jaw, and eye sockets all crushed. The coroner determined the cause of death was a massive fracture at the base of her skull that led to a fatal brain hemorrhage. In addition, doctors found a strange hole through her gums and jawbone that at first seemed to be a bullet wound, but no bullet was ever found in the victim's body. The time of Myrtle's death was estimated between 7:17 and 7:25 p.m., just minutes after she left the phone. Investigators believe the killer may have slipped in through the front door before it was locked, then quickly slid the bolt from inside. The strange sound Myrtle heard was likely the door opening. When she went to check, the attacker caught up to her and assaulted her in the kitchen, then escaped out the back window, which had been smashed open. Unfortunately, within half an hour of the body being found, the crime scene descended into chaos. Hundreds of curious onlookers gathered outside, and some even wandered into the house, trampling or disturbing nearly all the crucial evidence. A cabinet in the living room was found ransacked, but no one knew if anything had actually been stolen. Everything was just vague details, with no clear leads. Myrtle's family had already endured many hardships. She had been the wife of George Morgan, a World War I veteran who, due to war trauma, could not live at home and required long-term care at the VA hospital. Myrtle lived only on a meager military disability pension. After she was quietly laid to rest at Greenwood Cemetery in Chattanooga, the story of Myrtle Morgan faded from memory. especially after her husband died in 1972, and both their children also passed away in the years that followed. But even after nearly 70 years, the murder of Myrtle Morgan remains remembered as one of the city's most heartbreaking mysteries. The mysterious murder in Rockport, Indiana, a double homicide, a surviving pig, and the shadow of organized crime. In 1945, among the quiet, empty fields of Rockport, Indiana, a chilling mystery shook the entire state when two people from completely different backgrounds, Ethel Sparks, a young woman just 18, and George Tyson, a 34-year-old man who had once had a family, were discovered buried in the ground. All these dark secrets only came to light by chance, thanks to the unbelievable survival of a crippled pig. Everything began on the night of the 27th of October, 1945, when Mrs. Martha Brandenburg, a 54-year-old widow living in the remote countryside of Sulphur, was awakened by frantic knocking in the middle of the night. When she opened the door, she saw Lucy Berkeley, her 15-year-old neighbor, her face white with panic, breathlessly telling Martha that her barn was on fire. Lucy's boyfriend, Harley Walton, had risked his life running into the flames to help, but could only watch helplessly as the fire consumed everything. After the blaze was over, Martha's thoughts turned to her animals. 3 cows had luckily been left to graze outside that night and survived, but she feared most for her crippled pig, a pet she had once rescued from the slaughterhouse and considered a true member of the family. She was certain she'd lost it forever, but to her surprise, Lucy reassured her, saying she'd seen the pig running across the grass during the fire alarm. Looking out, Martha saw the pig lying peacefully in the pasture. No one could explain how a crippled pig could escape the fire on its own, but in that moment, everyone just breathed a sigh of relief, grateful for what seemed like a miracle. The next morning, Martha couldn't shake a sense of unease about the strange events. If the pig had been let out, could someone else have been trapped inside the barn when the fire started? She decided to search through the ashes and found odd items. An alarm clock, a tin box full of buttons, none of which belonged to her. Alarmed, she took everything to Sheriff Lavelle in the nearby town of English and returned to the scene with him for a closer look. At the same time, nearly 100 kilometers away, on the outskirts of Rockport, Farmer John Spady was checking his field when he noticed a patch of freshly turned earth, as if it had been dug up in a hurry. At first, he suspected it might be a hiding place for loot from the recent bank robbery at the Lake State Bank in Richland, only 15 miles away. John and a neighbor decided to dig at the spot. When their shovel struck something soft, they uncovered a woman's shoe. A few more shovelfuls later, a horrifying scene emerged. Beneath about 16 inches of earth lay 2 bodies, one male and one female, buried together. The man, dressed in a gray suit, lay on top of the young woman in the sweater. Police found $3,200 in cash carefully hidden in a small envelope. No identification, but in the man's pocket was a matchbook from the 121 Club Racetrack Casino in Jeffersonville. Autopsies showed this was a brutal double homicide. The man had been beaten beyond recognition, then shot several times in the stomach with a .38 caliber revolver. The young woman's fate was even more terrible, stabbed in the face with a sharp object, then strangled with a rope. Fingerprints helped identify the victims as George Tyson, 34, a fugitive wanted in connection with a shooting, and Ethel May Sparks, the 18-year-old waitress rumored to have been romantically involved with George. To understand how these two people ended up like this, investigators had to trace the tragedies that unfolded over the summer before. In July, George Tyson had been involved in the shooting of Joe Callahan outside Dolly's Tavern in Madison, then disappeared before police could catch him. Just a week later, at the same tavern, a stranger shot and killed Catherine Morrison, Joe's girlfriend. Ethel, who had been at the same table that day, was suspected by police but denied involvement and left town shortly afterward. The matchbook found on George led police to Jeffersonville, where they discovered that George and Ethel had rented an apartment under fake names, living quietly and only appearing at night. Neighbors recalled seeing them last on the 27th of October, leaving the apartment with 3 well-dressed men. No one realized that would be the last time anyone saw them alive. From the strange items found in Martha's burned barn, police pieced together a chilling scenario. On their final night, George and Ethel were kidnapped by the 3 men, brought to Sulphur, tortured and killed in the barn, which was then set on fire to destroy evidence. Afterward, the killers transported the bodies to Rockport for burial, an entire scheme revealed only because of one crippled pig that miraculously survived. The story took even darker turns, as both George and Ethel were linked to the criminal underworld, from casinos to notorious gangs in St. Louis. Ethel had once worked at the casino owned by the wife of mob boss Art Newman, had witnessed the unexplained disappearance of Kingpin Patrick Hogan, and had stayed at a motel run by Frank Buster Wortman, widely known as the top mobster in town. But even though police investigated everywhere, these criminal ties remained forever unproven theories. In the end, Ethel was brought home by her parents for burial at Lone Tree Cemetery in Arkansas. George was laid to rest in Williamson Cemetery, Georgia. His wife, Alessi, claimed his body along with the money found in his jacket. But the story of her mysterious husband and the cash soon faded into darkness. The Rockport case, with its strange rented apartment, the bloodstains in the burned barn, and the miraculous survival of a crippled pig, remains one of the great unanswered mysteries in Indiana history. Cold Case in Hanson, the vanishing of James W. Rogers. On the morning of the 18th of October, 1981, the small town of Hanson, Massachusetts, was still wrapped in its peaceful daily rhythm, just like any other day in a rural community of fewer than 9,000 people. But for the Rogers family, that morning opened up a void that has stretched on for more than 40 years, a mystery no one has ever been able to fill. James Rogers, the teenager known to his friends as Jimmy, put on his brown leather jacket, blue sneakers, and pale yellow pants, and left the little house on Lakeside Road to hitch a ride to a friend's home in Halifax, just a 10-minute drive from Hanson. As he had always done, Jimmy called his friend ahead of time to let him know he was coming. He also told his family about the trip. Everything seemed perfectly normal, but as that day passed, no one ever saw Jimmy show up in Halifax, and his family received no word from him. When night fell and Jimmy still hadn't come home, worry began to set in. But the police assumed it was just another case of a teenager running away from home, a familiar guess that had stalled so many missing child cases before. It wasn't until the 31st of October, nearly 2 weeks after Jimmy disappeared, that a real search effort began. More than 40 officers from Hanson and the Plymouth County Sheriff's Office spread out to comb the wild forests stretching 3 to 5 kilometers between Hanson and Pembroke. They crossed marshes, checked every thicket and path beneath the dense trees, but all they found was silence and disappointment. There wasn't a single sign that James had ever set foot there. The following day, when asked by reporters, police admitted they didn't know whether they should keep searching. From that moment on, the fate of James Rogers remained in darkness. A year after he went missing, Hanson police turned to psychics, hoping for any clue at all, but every effort led nowhere. Years later, age-progressed images of James as an adult were published in newspapers, hoping someone might recognize him. Looking back at what little remains, all anyone knows is that James was a brown-haired, brown-eyed teenager with a small chickenpox scar under his right eye, a distinctive cleft chin, and a gap between his front teeth. He spoke with a New England accent and had a rare trait, the absence of a right pectoral muscle. In old photos, James could be seen playing baseball, but beyond those details, his life before the disappearance is just a faint blur in the memory of Hanson's small community. At the Massachusetts Conference on Missing Children in 1985, James's mother, Emma Rogers, appeared with a face weighed down by grief. She admitted she had been naive to believe that life in a small town was perfectly safe. She and her family had always thought that terrible things only happened in big cities. It was a mistaken belief that left a mother to spend the rest of her life tormented by not knowing what truly happened to her son. The unsolved disappearance of Pierce Cremin, a silent file on the Irish coast. Pierce Cremin, a young man just 28 years old, left his home after an evening out with friends, and from that moment, he vanished without a trace. His disappearance became a lingering torment not only for the Cremin family, but also a source of endless questions that no one could ever answer. Pierce was born and raised in a large family in Turner's Cross, in the city of Cork. He was a beloved tennis coach, known in the community for his patience, his gentle smile, and his calm demeanor on the court. On the morning of the 30th of October, 2000, Pierce spent time with his family, planning lunch with his mother, and making plans with his sister Siobhan to celebrate her birthday over the weekend. No one imagined that this warm family gathering would be the last time they would all see each other in their cherished home. That evening, Pierce went to meet friends at the Viaduct Bar on Bandon Road. After a few hours together, he said goodbye and left around 8:30 p.m., planning to return to the house he shared with his brother Cormac on Glasheen Road. but Pierce never came home. The next morning, Cormac immediately noticed his brother's unusual absence. Pierce was always punctual and reliable. Cormac reported him missing to the police, sparking a search that would stretch on for years. In the days that followed, clues about Pierce's whereabouts remained frustratingly vague. A friend reported that about a week after Pierce vanished, he thought he'd seen Pierce filling up at a service station on Kinsale Road, but not realizing Pierce was missing, only mentioned it to police much later. By Christmas that year, there was only one more piece of information. A man matching Pierce's description came to rent a room at a guest house on McCurtain Street, but the guest house was fully booked. The man left and was never seen again. It wasn't until February 2001 that a new discovery both renewed the family's hope and deepened their pain. On the 23rd of February, Pierce's blue Fiat Bravo was pulled from the sea near Roberts Cove. It was the intuition and persistence of Cormac and a friend that led to the breakthrough. They found the license plate on a cliff, along with shards of broken taillight, which helped police identify the location and call in the Navy to recover the car from the depths. When the car was brought up from the water, the Kremen family's hopes and fears surged all at once. But inside, there was no sign of Pierce. No body, no keys, no clothing, not a single clue as to what had happened to him. The car was battered, wedged between rocks, leading many to suspect Pierce had taken his own life. But those who loved him most refused to believe that theory. His sister Siobhan said Pierce had always been afraid of the sea and would never have chosen to end his life that way. For the family, the most likely explanation was that someone else had helped dispose of the car or had been directly involved, and that the true fate of Pierce remained a mystery. In the years that followed, Pierce's parents never stopped searching. They held on to a fragile hope, even as their lives became full of unfinished conversations and unanswered questions. Pierce's father, Dennis, spent much of his old age quietly wandering the streets of Cork, seeking out the homeless, stopping at every guest house, always carrying the belief that someone, somewhere, might have seen or helped Pierce. His mother, Monica, to the end of her life, could never accept the truth. As her memory faded, she would often ask her children to call Pierce, just to tell him that his mother missed him and, if he could, to come home for a family meal. She always kept a fresh jar of mayonnaise in the fridge, just in case Pierce returned, so she could make him his favorite ham sandwich with mayonnaise. Now, both Dennis and Monica have passed away, never knowing what really happened to their son. Those left behind, Siobhan and Cormac, are still searching for answers. At one point, they even placed hope in a man with the same name in Australia. For more than 20 years, the pain of the Kremen family has never closed. They wish for nothing more than a single sign, just to know that Pierce has found peace, or at least that he might one day return to rest beside his parents. The Vanishing of Des Walsh, Silent Mystery in the City of Limerick. In the early hours of a September morning in 1999, as the Irish city of Limerick was just waking up from a bustling weekend night, a young man quietly left the Works nightclub. That was the last confirmed sighting of Des Walsh, a moment that has haunted his family for more than 20 years. Desmond Walsh, or Des as everyone called him, was the middle son of Julia and Thomas Walsh. He grew up in a small house in Drumkeen, right on the Tipperary border in the Raheen outskirts of Limerick. For 4 years, Des worked as a security guard at the Dell factory. Strangely, Des wasn't the only one from Dell to disappear. Two of his co-workers, Matthew Carroll in 1998 and Angus Shanahan in 2000, also vanished under circumstances no one could ever explain. The 17th of September, 1999 began just like any other day for Des. He had the day off, went out for a meal, then came home to change clothes for the evening. Around 7 p.m., Des left home, stopped by Costello's bar, and then went to the Glentworth Hotel. He called a few friends to ask them out for drinks, but no one could join him since they had to work in the morning. In the end, he went alone to the Works nightclub on Bedford Row. The last time friends saw Des was around 2:30 a.m., when Helen Cassidy and her husband spotted him walking down the stairs from the dance floor. That night, Des simply greeted them quickly and didn't stop to chat as he usually did. That would be the last moment anyone familiar ever saw him. It wasn't until Monday morning, when Des failed to show up at the Dell factory, that people began to worry. No one could reach him, and his coworkers and housemates immediately contacted the police. The investigation began, but from the start it ran into dead ends. There were rumors that Des had been seen in bars around Dublin, places he had visited on previous weekends. But even after police and family went searching, every clue led to nothing. Des's phone only rang through to voicemail. No one knew where he was, what he was doing, or if something had happened to him. Later, the family remembered signs they hadn't noticed at the time. Before his disappearance, Des had been beaten up, badly enough to leave his body bruised, yet he continued going to work, never complaining or telling anyone. Julie recalled that Des was always gentle, never in conflict with anyone, fond of music, and had sung in score competitions. At work, he was well liked by his colleagues. Even after being assaulted, he never showed his pain. That's why the family could never imagine Des suddenly disappearing. He was never involved in anything shady, nor was he withdrawn or distant. The pain deepened when Des's father died just 2 years after his son vanished, carrying with him a grief that can never be put into words. Julia remembered that just 3 months before Des disappeared, he would still visit his father often, even buying him CDs as gifts. The night before he vanished, he was supposed to visit his mother for her birthday, but Julia hesitated to call, worried Des would think she was asking for a present. It was a regret that lingered. If she had called Des that night, would things have turned out differently? After 24 years, all that remains is a cold file with empty spaces no one can fill. No one ever found any of Des's belongings from that night. All his personal effects remained untouched in his room, as if he had simply stepped out for a moment and then vanished into thin air. Both family and police believe Des is gone, but with no body and no concrete proof, the faintest hope still flickers on. Christmas Eve tragedy in Louisiana, the cold case of Mary Ann Fowler's disappearance. On a cold evening, the 24th of December, 2002, in the quiet suburb of Port Allen, Louisiana, a woman beloved by her entire community vanished without a trace, leaving a wound that has never healed for her family and becoming the center of one of America's most mysterious unsolved disappearances, a mystery that, to this day, has never been resolved. Mary Ann was a devoted teacher and a gentle mother who always placed her children's happiness above everything else. On that fateful Christmas Eve, she kept her annual tradition of visiting her husband, Jerry Fowler, a former Louisiana State Elections Commissioner who was serving time in a federal prison in Texas after a major political scandal. Her son, John Pritchett, had invited her repeatedly to spend Christmas with his family in Brusley, but Mary Ann never changed her mind. She wanted to keep her promise to visit her husband every Christmas. That night, on her long journey, Mary Ann planned to stop and rest with relatives in Lake Charles before heading on to Texas. After hours of driving, she pulled into a Subway sandwich shop just off LA 415 in Port Allen for dinner. No one could have imagined that this simple moment would mark the turning point in her life. After the customers had left, and Mary Ann's car still sat silently in the parking lot, the staff went outside to check. They were stunned to find her purse, car keys, her uneaten meal, and even several false fingernails scattered on the ground. Everything pointed to a desperate struggle that had taken place right outside the door. Grainy footage from a liquor store security camera nearby didn't capture the whole event, but was enough to show a haunting scene. A dark pickup truck pulled up next to Mary Ann's car, and a stranger dragged her into the truck before it sped away into the night, leaving behind an empty parking lot and a host of questions that remain unanswered years later. For John Pritchett, the memory of that night will always be an unhealed scar. Driving home with his family, he assumed the flashing lights of police cars on the highway were nothing more than another traffic accident, until he received a message from the sheriff's office asking him to come identify his mother's purse. That was the moment the cruel truth crashed down and changed his family's life forever. Mary Ann's disappearance coincided with a series of mysterious murders targeting women across southern Louisiana. The killer, who had not yet been caught, quickly drew police suspicion: Derek Todd Lee, who would later become known nationwide as the Baton Rouge serial killer. Lee's victims were usually women traveling alone. He often left their bodies in places where they would be found, haunting the entire community for years. Investigators became convinced that Lee was connected to Mary Ann's disappearance. His maroon Chevrolet pickup matched the vehicle seen on the surveillance footage. Just days after the case went public, Lee hastily sold his truck. Phone records showed he was present in Port Allen on the night Mary Ann vanished, and his signal later appeared in Iberville Parish, the same place where another victim's body was found. Lee's wife confirmed that their home was empty that night until he returned after 4 a.m., without explanation. During the search, police discovered one of Marianne's books near the scene. Hopes of finding the killer's DNA under her broken false fingernails were dashed when forensic testing revealed nothing useful, and every other lead gradually slipped away, especially after Lee's truck passed through several new owners, erasing any remaining evidence. 2 years after her disappearance, Marianne Fowler was declared legally dead. In 2005, her family, friends, and former colleagues held a memorial service to honor the memory of a woman full of kindness. Meanwhile, Sheriff Mike Kazes and his team never gave up hope, contacting Lee in prison many times and even offering a reduced sentence if he would reveal where Marianne's body was hidden. Each time, Lee either stayed silent or grew angry. A capital city mystery, the vanishing of John Johnson in the heart of Dublin. On the morning of the 9th of February, 2019, the city of Dublin was as vibrant as any weekend day, but no one could have imagined that in the middle of such a modern capital, a foreign man from Iceland could disappear completely without leaving a single trace in just a matter of minutes. John Johnson was 41 years old at the time, a quiet, steady man from Reykjavik. He'd been a taxi driver for years, living with his fiancée, Jana Gudjonsdottir. Joan's life was simple and ordinary, free of any trouble, conflicts, criminal connections, or involvement with gangs. In February 2019, Jean decided to travel to Ireland alone to take part in a major poker tournament at the Bonington Hotel in North Dublin. This was both an event he had carefully prepared for and an opportunity to relax before a planned vacation with his fiancée. On the 8th of February, John arrived in Dublin, checked into his hotel, and that evening jumped straight into the lively poker tournament with new friends. Everyone who was there remembered John as cheerful, even though he lost €4,000 that night, a considerable sum for anyone. The next morning, around 10 a.m., Jana landed in Dublin to meet her fiancé. When she arrived at the hotel, she found John still asleep in the room. Everything was completely normal. Nothing seemed amiss. They chatted briefly, and then Jana went down to the lobby to get coffee for both of them. In the few minutes she was gone, something inexplicable happened. At exactly 11:05 a.m., the hotel's security camera captured John leaving his room in a hurry, without his phone and without leaving a note for anyone. Just 2 minutes later, security cameras around the hotel caught John walking past a pub and a nursing home, crossing Swords Road and turning onto Collins Avenue. The last known image of him was as he passed the Highfield Healthcare Center, a tall man, strolling calmly, smoking a cigarette. That was the last time any camera saw John Johnson. Within just 10 minutes of leaving the hotel, he had vanished, as if he had never existed on those city streets. At first, Jana wasn't particularly worried, assuming John had simply gone out for a walk or to get breakfast. But when he didn't return all day and his phone couldn't be reached, her calm quickly gave way to mounting anxiety. By the next morning, Jana immediately contacted Irish police, while Joan's family in Iceland rushed to Dublin to help with the search. Police mobilized every available resource to search around the hotel, checking all parks, outlying neighborhoods, and even calling in the Civil Defense Force. They scoured traffic camera footage, but after 11:07 a.m. that day, there wasn't a single image of John anywhere. Both the family and police soon ruled out the idea that Joan had disappeared on purpose. His bank accounts, credit cards, and travel documents all showed no activity after that morning. John had just renewed his taxi driver's license in Iceland. There was no sign he wanted to leave his life behind or cut off contact. His brother once said Joan was a truthful man, never hiding anything from his loved ones. If he'd run into any trouble, he would have called home right away. In February 2020, a surprising new lead surfaced. An inmate in Iceland contacted Joan's family, claiming that the €4,000 John lost at the poker tournament actually belonged to another Icelandic criminal who was also in Dublin at the time. According to the story, when the owner of the money realized it was gone, a confrontation broke out and Joan was killed, his body hidden in a nearby park. Soon after, Irish police and a local priest received anonymous letters alleging John had been murdered and his remains were somewhere in a Dublin park. These revelations prompted police to reopen the case, bringing in sniffer dogs to comb every inch of Santry Park in 2024, but every search came up empty. John's family has never stopped hoping. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, relatives and friends return to Dublin to keep searching for him. They do everything they can to keep Joan's story from fading into oblivion. 6 years have passed. the Irish Gardaí are now officially working with Europol to expand the investigation internationally. New theories keep surfacing. Was John the victim of a case of mistaken identity? Was he targeted by a killer who got the wrong man? Yet, without evidence or witnesses, the truth about John Jonassen's fate remains a gaping, unanswered question right in the heart of modern Ireland. The empty car, a missing newlywed, and a 6-decade mystery. The unsolved case of Mary Shotwell Little. In October 1965, amid the vibrant energy of Atlanta, Georgia, a city whose busy streets still bore the marks of a changing southern metropolis, no one could have imagined that a mysterious disappearance would occur in the middle of such seemingly peaceful life, leaving an entire city haunted for decades to come. At the time, Mary Shotwell Little was just 25 years old, a young woman recently married to Roy Little for only 6 weeks. The couple lived together in Atlanta. Mary was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, graduated from the North Carolina College for Women, and had moved to Atlanta in 1962 to take a job as a secretary at the C&S Bank, a position to which she devoted all her passion and energy. Her days as a newlywed with Roy seemed filled with happiness and hope, but no one could have known that fate was quietly leading Mary toward a tragic crossroads on what should have been an entirely ordinary night. On the 14th of October, with Roy away on a business trip, Mary went to work at the bank as usual. After her shift, she stopped by a store to buy groceries, preparing for a small celebration to welcome her husband home. That evening, Mary met a close friend for dinner at the S&S cafeteria, a familiar spot right inside the Lenox Square shopping center. After dinner, the two friends went shopping and then parted ways in the parking lot around 8 p.m. Mary smiled brightly as she waved goodbye, walking toward her 1965 Mercury Comet, completely unaware that this would be the moment that began a mystery still unsolved to this day. From that point on, every trace of Mary seemed to vanish from the world. The next morning, when Mary didn't show up at the bank and failed to call in sick, her manager grew worried. She contacted Roy, co-workers, and the friend who dined with Mary the night before. Together, they returned to Lenox Square to investigate, but the security guards said Mary's car was nowhere to be seen. Yet by midday, when the manager went back to check again, the Mercury Comet had suddenly reappeared in its old spot, and what they found inside only deepened the mystery. The car was coated with Georgia's signature red dust, as if it had just traveled country roads before returning to the city. Inside, Mary's groceries were still on the seat, along with bottles of Coke and her familiar Kent cigarettes. But what puzzled everyone most was that her personal clothes were neatly folded on the center console. A bra and a single stocking were found on the floor, the stocking torn and bearing small bloodstains. There were also blood traces on the steering wheel, the driver's door, and the front seat, later confirmed to be Mary's blood. However, the amount was minimal, more like a nosebleed than a major injury. This detail led investigators to suspect the crime scene had been staged to mislead them. Checking the odometer, Roy discovered the Mercury Comet had traveled an extra 40 miles since he last saw it, which convinced police that the car had been driven away from the mall before returning. Stranger still, Mary's Georgia license plates had vanished, replaced by North Carolina plates. The investigation quickly expanded into neighboring states, and soon police discovered that Mary's gas credit card had been used at 2 gas stations in North Carolina, one in Charlotte on the morning of the 15th of October, and another in Raleigh 12 hours later. Strangely, the distance between the cities is only about 165 miles, a journey that doesn't require half a day. Attendants at both stations remembered serving a young woman with blood on her head and legs, who appeared confused but never asked for help, and she was accompanied by 1 or 2 men who acted controlling. The receipts were all signed in handwriting, very similar to Mary's, only adding to the weirdness of the entire case. Suspicion quickly fell on Mary's newlywed husband Roy, who became the center of the investigation. Some of Mary's friends disliked Roy and even refused to attend the wedding. He avoided polygraph tests and didn't seem especially anxious about his wife's disappearance, but he was never criminally charged or directly linked to the case. As the investigation continued, police learned that Mary had recently become anxious, afraid of being alone, receiving strange phone calls at work, and even being eavesdropped on when talking about her marriage. Once, she received roses from a secret admirer, a bouquet delivered to a shop near her home by an unknown sender. All these details led investigators to consider the possibility that Mary had been stalked or harassed prior to her disappearance. 18 months after Mary vanished, the mystery only deepened when Diane Shields, a colleague from the bank, was brutally murdered. Diane had lived with some of Mary's old friends, though there was no clear evidence of any direct connection between the two. Diane's body was found in the trunk of her car, her clothes intact, with no sign of sexual assault. The coincidences in their workplace, relationships, and the circumstances of both cases caused a sensation in Atlanta. Rumors swirled of a possible criminal network operating within the bank, but no evidence ever surfaced to prove it. Nearly 60 years have passed, and every theory remains an unanswered question. Was Mary the victim of a random abduction, or was she targeted and followed long before that night? Was her disappearance somehow linked to Diane Shields' death, or are these tragedies simply the unsolvable mysteries of a restless era? No matter how much time passes or how memories fade, the question of what happened to Mary Shotwell Little still lingers in the minds of her family, friends, and entire generations of people in both Atlanta and Charlotte. Who killed Sharmini Anandavel? A chilling mystery that has haunted Toronto for 26 years. Who killed Sharmini Anandavel? It's a question that has haunted the city of Toronto for more than 2 decades, a lingering uncertainty at the heart of modern society, where all that remains is the pain and regret of an immigrant family who once dreamed of a better life in a new land. In the summer of 1999, the Don Mills neighborhood still basked in its familiar peace, high-rise apartments nestled among rows of green trees, and everyone believed children there would always be safe under their own roofs. No one imagined that a quiet, hard-working, and ambitious 15-year-old girl would become the victim of one of Canada's most mysterious unsolved cases, a case for which, even now, no one has ever been held truly accountable. Sharmini Anandavel was the daughter of a Sri Lankan immigrant family. She lived with her parents and younger brother in a small apartment like so many other working-class families. Neighbors all knew Sharmini for her kindness and reliability, always ready to lend a hand and especially devoted to caring for her mother and little brother whenever her mother was busy. Sharmini's greatest dream was to become a lawyer so she could protect the vulnerable, something she often promised her mother she would do in the future. That summer, Sharmini excitedly told her family that she had just landed her first summer job. She proudly explained it was a position connected to the police department, and her family, surprised but proud, believed their 15-year-old daughter was brave enough to step out and explore the world beyond their small home. On the morning of the 12th of June, 1999, Sharmini dressed carefully and told her mother she was heading off to her new job. No one knew that this would be the last time they would ever see her leave their familiar apartment. That evening, when Sharmini hadn't returned home, her mother began to worry. The family immediately set out searching, contacted friends, and called the police. But the days that followed were filled only with desperate waiting and heartbreak. No sign of Sharmini, no answers at all. 4 months later, the painful truth finally emerged when her remains were found in a small ravine just a few miles from home, so badly decomposed that police could recover almost no forensic evidence. The family's hope and the bright future of a teenage girl were cruelly extinguished by what seemed like nothing more than a simple job invitation. From the earliest days of the investigation, suspicion fell on a man who lived just below Sharmini's apartment, Stanley Tippett, then a well-dressed 23-year-old who liked to parade around in police-style jackets and boasted to local children that he had once worked in law enforcement. Sharmini's brother recalled that Tippett had given his sister a job application and invited her to work at a nearby pool, details that, at the time, no one gave much thought to, thinking it was harmless. But after Sharmini vanished, Tippett moved out of the apartment building without warning, which only deepened police suspicion. Though Tippett was brought in for questioning, he denied any involvement. He admitted to giving Sharmini a job application but insisted it was only for a pool job. Yet police discovered the application was fake. There was no such position, and the police-related job Sharmini had believed in was nothing but a trap, carefully constructed. The most chilling part was what came afterward. In 2005, at a Walmart job fair, Tippett, using the fake name Jason Armstrong, approached a young woman, promising her a job at the YMCA, and again, providing a phony application. When the woman became suspicious and stopped responding, Tippett began following her and watching her every day. When police searched Tippett's van, they found it stocked with kidnapping supplies, duct tape, plastic sheeting, zip ties, knives, and an air gun. But with no direct evidence of criminal intent, Tippett received only a suspended sentence and remained free. He didn't stop there. That same year, Tippett targeted a 13-year-old girl with a similar fake job offer. Luckily, her mother caught on and alerted the police in time, preventing disaster. But Tippett's pattern of predatory behavior continued until August 2008, when he was finally arrested in Cordis after a brutal attack on two intoxicated teenage girls wandering the road late at night. That night, Tippett offered the girls a ride home. After dropping one off safely, he drove the other into a remote forest and launched a violent attack. The girls' screams drew the attention of nearby residents, who called police. Tippett fled in his van but was caught just hours later. At his 2009 trial, Tippett tried to claim he'd been carjacked and that others were responsible for the crime. The judge dismissed his lies, and Tippett was ultimately convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault. In 2011, he was declared a dangerous offender and sentenced to indefinite imprisonment. At last, the law recognized the threat Tippett posed to society, but for Sharmini's family, justice for their daughter was still out of reach. What haunts the public is the chilling consistency of Tippett's methods over the years. He always targeted young girls searching for work, exploiting their trust, and casting himself as a reliable adult, sometimes a police officer, sometimes a representative of a respected organization, then luring them with false job offers and fake authority. It was a carefully staged act of power, designed to win trust and lead his victims into a deadly trap. Despite overwhelming evidence of Tippett's repeated predatory behavior, Toronto police have never been able to charge him with Sharmini's death. Her remains were so decomposed when found that there was no longer enough physical evidence to identify her killer. And so, for 25 years now, every the 12th of June, the community remembers Sharmini Anandavel, a lasting warning about the dangers of predators who blend into everyday life. For her family, the pain remains raw. Justice is still unfinished. The question of who killed Sharmini lingers on in Toronto's cold case files, a ghost of the past, and a reminder that sometimes the truth is out of reach, and justice doesn't always prevail in the real world. If you found today's story meaningful, please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another journey with us. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in our next exploration.